Welcome to Make It Plain from Make Plain Jesus Ministries, featuring Pastor James Bryan, where we take biblical truths in everyday situations and break them down to be as plain as possible. So, stay tuned and enjoy the broadcast.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Make It Plain, the podcast that talks about all kinds of things related to your life. And as the announcer introduced to you, that we do it all from a biblical perspective. So we want to just touch various topics, and I like the idea that we do that because, each episode can be about anything related to life. It could be something about personal relationships. It could be something about how do you raise kids. It could be something that's purely biblical question. It could be something that's nothing to do with it, but yet we look at it from a biblical perspective. And so during the time that we spend in this particular podcast, we're able to just share different truths, just different perspectives that may help you. And we hope that each of these podcasts has something in it that will help you in your daily life. So today I want to just touch on this topic. It's called Man on the Ground. Man on the Ground. And I know the topic itself sounds a bit strange, like what is this about? Well, that's the great thing about it. We get to explore this topic together. And so in this whole genesis of this topic, Man on the Ground, came about, I guess it's about a month ago, maybe right before Thanksgiving time period of 2020. And I was walking, I got out of the car, was going to the church building, and I looked to the left, and there was this gentleman on the ground, and he hadn't fallen. He had purposely positioned himself there, and he was lying on the ground, kind of had the edge of the building kind of supporting his head, and you could tell that he was homeless, and that he hadn't been anywhere in a while, but he kind of positioned himself near a famous, I won't say famous, but locally famous or popular barbecue place. And it seemed as though the folks that worked there had given him a meal, and he was lying there enjoying it. And so he had his food, and then of course the other content spread all over the place. And I watched and I looked at that point, and he didn't acknowledge me at all. And I went into the building, our building, the church building, and it just hit me. I said, you know what? We still have some food in our pantry, in the church pantry. Let me go and give him some other things that will last him past this one meal. And so we packaged it in the bag and gave it to him. And as we gave it to him, he turned around, looked, grabbed it, didn't say anything, and then went on about his eating. And so I went back in the building. There was a couple of other people that were there. And I said, well, wait a minute. We have some other things in the corner. Let's go ahead and give him some of that too. So again, it would last a little bit longer. So one of the guys took it and he gave it to him, and he took the bag, and I don't think he said anything at that point either. And we went back in. And so that whole concept, or that whole interaction was one that ended up being, from our perspective, a blessing to him. And it was something that we enjoyed, but it probably was something that he was grateful for. He just never expressed it. And so when we think about this from Man on the Ground perspective, we have to look at it from the standpoint of just how we go about interacting with folks that are around us. You see, in this time that we're in, there are many people that are impacted financially and other ways by the pandemic that have been going around, where businesses have not stayed open as much as they were, and some of the favorite places, especially in the service industry, were impacted. So we find now that there's a number of people that are in need, various needs. Sometimes it's food, sometimes it's clothing, sometimes it's just a companion to talk to, and sometimes it could be financial. The list goes on and on. But when I looked at this gentleman here, what came to mind was something that was worth considering and talking about, meaning we as people oftentimes will find ourselves coming across folks that may be having a hard time in life, may be going through different things. And what they end up doing is, or what we do is that we'll say, okay, here, we'll give you something that we have. Maybe we have an extra dollar. Maybe we have an extra something. And then we go about our business. And that's a great thing that we do because there's a person that may be in need. But sometimes there needs to be more than that. So it's easy to identify someone who obviously doesn't have a shelter. But we also have to keep in mind right now that there are folks that may be in shelter, but they don't have anything in it. Case in point. Because someone may have lost a job, what may have happened is they still have their house, but they don't have much food in it. They may have children and they don't have enough food, so they ration the food out. And so if you as a person has the ability to give more food, then that's something that we should do. We should all be looking to see where the needs are. And to the extent that we can actually help someone in need, we should do it. And so I want to explore that a little bit farther. You see, right now, the need is greater, but it's not just set up for folks that may look like they don't have enough clothing or obviously are living on the streets or in the woods and all. Those outreaches need to continue to happen. But in addition to that, we need to be aware of those that may not be as obvious, that are really struggling and trying to figure out how to feed their family, how to keep their house, how to figure out, just where they can get more employment, how to deal with different aspects, because maybe they were used to being a provider and now they aren't. And I believe in the time that we're in, it takes government programs, yes, but it takes all of us individually to be able to look and be aware and to be able to help and address those that are nearby. And so I want you to think about that as I think about it, and as we go about our daily lives, that we have to make sure that we're looking out for one another. I remember watching, I think it was just a news clip, and a gentleman was saying that all his life he's always worked hard, and he's felt that everyone just needs to work. And that's been his mantra. And he helps where he can, but he's like, people need to just get up and work. But this was the first time, this period in 2020, where all of a sudden, all of his private, small businesses and things that he had all collapsed a bit. And he found himself in a position that he had never been in before. That position was a position of need. And now his whole perspective opened up because he was just about the work itself, which is right. You need to do that. But he realized, too, that even someone as diligent as he thought himself to be can run into these points in their lives when there is something missing or lacking financially and in other areas. And so we have to consider that and think about it, that just because someone is in need doesn't necessarily put shouldn't put a negative image on them. Everyone goes through these periods of times when things are harder than others. So let me look at a couple of points, and rather than just continue to talk about it from that perspective, I want to give you a couple of points to think about. And when you think about this, as our topic is man on the ground, I want you to think about, first of all, we all have to have compassion. Compassion for one another. Even if they don't look the same, even if they're not the same religion, even if they're not from the same city, even if they're not in the same working class level, if you will, even if they don't belong to the same company, we have to realize that everybody has a need. And so it isn't about being best friends and best buddies, but everyone has a right to be able to live, right? And so whenever it is in our ability, we have to make sure that we are providing food, at least, or clothing or something. And there are many organizations out there trying to provide and fulfill for the needs of folks that are asking. And so it's great in those cases that those folks are identified and they come to the organizations, those nonprofits and others that are diligently seeking to help. But there's also still a group of people that haven't yet been identified. They're lost somewhere in the cracks. And we just need to think, every one of us, no matter what your position is in life, how we can have compassion and provide for them. Now, second thing I want you to say, even under this whole umbrella of compassion, I want you to think about it this way. When you realize that, yes, I agree with you, James, that what you're talking about is something that is crucial, and we all need to do it, Democratic, Republican, Independent, whatever. We have to make sure that what politics needs to go out the window, and we need to think about the human beings, right? So when you go and you're looking for opportunities, I tell folks in our church, let's ask the Lord to show you where the needs are. So you don't always have to go and say to everybody, hey, are you in need? Hey, it looks like you're in need. That doesn't help them because they haven't always been like that. Life has changed for a moment with them, and they need help to get through that patch. So what you do is when you see that there's potentially a need, you volunteer something to them. Say, hey, we had an extra, or we thought about you. We're trying to figure out, who to give this extra to. So I'm just going to bless you with it, or just want to give it to you. It's one of those things where you think about it as just a gifting, not trying to identify them. Oh, you look like you really need help here. We don't want to do that. We want everyone's self-esteem to at least be there. We want to build it up. We want to strengthen it. Because again, it isn't a something on their part most of the time that they're in these situations, because things happen. Many people who are in need right now didn't anticipate it. They didn't plan it. They did all the right things, but circumstances changed. We have to remember that. So having that compassion and being able to just decide you want to bless someone is the right thing to do. Secondly, when you think about all this, I'm saying secondly, I'm really on number 3. I want you to really examine your motivations for it, right? In the example that I gave you about the man on the ground, you have to realize something that happened, and I mentioned it explicitly, but I didn't highlight it. You see, when we went and gave, he didn't acknowledge other than to take it. If your motivation for helping someone is about getting accolades or getting the recognition, oh, thank you, you are so great and all, that comes sometimes, but that can't be the motivation. The motivation has to be there's another human being in need. And because of that, let's help one another. And so when we think about it from that perspective, and if we look at it from that perspective, then our feelings don't get hurt if the person who is receiving doesn't acknowledge in the way that you think they should. Again, this gentleman was lying there on the concrete, on the sidewalk. And I don't know where his shelter was. I don't think he had one. And so, yes, I could have said, you could at least say thank you, but that's not the requirement. The requirement is there's a need, and you just be able to fulfill that need in itself is a blessing, right? And so regardless of our backgrounds, we have to remember that our motivations still need to be right. That reminds me too, there's a scripture in the Bible and in the book of Matthew where this is actually discussed, where Jesus talks about this, and it comes to this point where everyone's gathered in front and he separates one group from another. And basically what he's saying is, blessed are you who fed me when I was hungry and clothed me when I was naked, and goes through a list of things. And the people said, well, when did we do that? Jesus, what are you talking about? And what ended up happening, what he said is, when you did it to the least of these. And so in that particular scenario, it's an encouragement, especially for those who are Christ followers, but anyone else even outside of that scope, it's an important thing for us to realize. We all live on this planet, so to the extent that we can help one another when it's in our ability, within our means, we should strongly consider doing it. And it doesn't have to be that you need to have the latest newspaper reporter around or the video coverage of what you're doing. It's just taking care of somebody in need at that moment. And that's where the compassion, that's where the motivation, all that comes together so that we can focus on the need of the community. I believe that when we help one another, regardless of background, then barriers begin to come down. And then as a community, we all can rise up and do better and greater things. But when we're stepping over one another or ignoring needs, then we can only grow or we can only succeed to a marginal extent as opposed to the whole extent of which the potential is there to be realized. And so we got to think about that. So I talked to you about the compassion part. I talked to you about the motivations and the things that are there. When you think about your neighbors, so you may ask, well, who are my neighbors? Who should I be concerned about? Well, if you're in an open setting somewhere, and I say that because, there are certain situations where it doesn't make sense or maybe safety is a strong concern. But there are ways that you can help folks in need without putting yourself at risk. If you're in an open place, like in our case, we were going into the church and there's a shopping center right there. So it was an open spot. We could do that. If you were in a shopping center or some other place or a place where other folks are there where you can feel comfortable just giving, or if you're able to drive up and drop it off to them outside, then you're good. If you're able to get in a building like a multi-purpose room that your organization may hold or own, that's another place. There are many ways that you can get resources. There's also the ability to give to many of the nonprofits that I mentioned that are out there trying to service folks that are hungry, trying to service folks that need clothing, trying to service folks that need help with education because now it's become more and more difficult. And I talked about some of that with the children when I did an earlier podcast. And so these are ways that you can reach out if you physically yourself can't do it. But it's something special about being involved and actually taking the time to help somebody in need. And so I want you to consider that. If in the U.S. if we were a group that would really be concerned about one another that way, we could do wonderful things. Let me give you another example. I used to work for the American Red Cross, and I'm not advertising for anyone in particular, but during some of the major disasters, especially some that I can bring to mind that I went to and saw the folks that were working, all of these folks would drop their everyday life to just come down for 1 week, 2 weeks, whatever the time period is, to actually pitch in and help people who had a very bad experience, whether their house was destroyed, from an earthquake, maybe other things got destroyed, maybe they were injured, all kinds of things that may have happened. And these folks come and just volunteer, hand out food, patch them up, connect them with services. And in those types of environments, they're helping. And there's something special about helping folks with yourself, meaning face to face, or getting involved yourself, bringing supplies and doing those types of things. It is something special. So when you think about this podcast, Man on the Ground, I want you to think about, well, how can I do more to help folks that are around me that may be in need? Yes, I got to still assist those that are obviously in need, but there are others that are around too now that have joined that grouping of having some needs, but you want to be able to do it where you can help them keep their dignity. So your neighbor is anyone else that you come across, and you want to be able to be a help where you can. Lastly, I just want to say this. Even with all the other rhetoric and everything else that's around, let's get to the point that we can actually have conversations with one another. And even at times, even if you don't agree on politics or your favorite football team or your favorite college football, baseball team, whatever it might be, even if you don't agree on those, make sure that from human being to human being that you can respect one another enough to care. Because you never know who the next man on the ground might be. It could be you. And you want to have the compassion from someone else to be able to help lift you up off the ground so that you don't have to be there long, and then you can move on to the next phase of your life. It's that kind of compassion, that kind of love, it's that kind of caring for one another that will cause things to change. If this is a message, or I won't say message, but a podcast that has helped you a lot, I want you to communicate with us. Let us know that. Give us some other insights about things that you may have done or thinking about doing that would actually help your neighbor that you come across. It's often that I've been in places where folks would have ignored those that are obviously in need. We don't want to be in that group of folks that do that, right? We want to make sure going forward that we are being compassionate, aware, and that we're doing all that we can do. You can't solve every problem, but the problems or situations that are within your reach or your grasp, why don't we all just say that we're going to go ahead and address it to the best way that we can? And then everything else will fall into place. So with that being said, I hope you have a great day. I hope this has been a benefit to you. And we're going to ask you to keep listening, subscribe to us, get involved in things that we're doing, find out what else we're doing throughout the ministry, throughout jamesrbryan.com, other things that are happening. And so when you're able to do those things, we get a chance to interact with you on a regular basis. Until then, I hope you have a great day.